This session is entitled Grace and Truth Toward Christlike Relationships with Muslims. I want to inform you about a significant project. We call it the Grace and Truth Project. What it is it grows out of this global gathering in Kenya a number of years ago. I had the privilege of facilitating this discussion with all these leaders concerned about Muslims, and they were specifically concerned about the alienation between Christians and Muslims, and said, how can we address this? So what emerged was this book, Grace and Truth, that you can buy there in the back. And what it does is it focuses more on discipleship, how we live our life, being Christ-like in our approach to Muslims, not methodology, missiology, how we share our faith. This talks about living it out. And what is significant, I'm the lead author, but this particular book reflects input from 70 leaders around the world working with Muslims, 20 revisions. I had a wonderful editor. So it's a unique document. It's a consensus document. Now, a consensus document it reflects the spectrum of evangelical thought about how we relate to Muslims. The problem with the consensus document is, for some people, it's going to be too conservative, too much emphasis on truth. Others, it's too affirming, too much emphasis on grace. That's grace and truth. But we encourage people to use this booklet as a starting point. How will you wrestle with these issues? And so what we've done in my organization as an illustration, we've come up with the Peace Catalyst version, which we do think would probably fit at least the vineyard well. The Bible says in John 1:14, Jesus was full of grace and truth. Okay, the revelation of God is Jesus, this person who is full of grace and truth. And so as the original booklet and then the Peace Catalyst version tries to do, is we're answering the question, how can we be agents of peace in this polarized world and faithfully bear witness to Jesus? There's way too much information in this book and in these principles, so I'm going to just give a quick overview and then highlight a few points, tell some stories. There's 10 points that we came up with. We said be Jesus-centered in our interaction, be truthful and gracious in our words and witness, be wise in our words and witness, be respectful and bold in our witness, be prudent in a globalized world. I'm going to share about that one because you probably won't hear that very often. Be persistent in our call for religious freedom. Be peaceable and uncompromising in our dialogue. Be loving toward all. And here's where Peace Catalyst definitely differed. You can appreciate this. In the booklet, we only have 9 points, and we couldn't come up to any consensus regarding church and state. Can you imagine? And so because of this, it's not addressed in the booklet, but Peace Catalyst has our affirmations, and you can get this particular affirmation on our website under the Grace and Truth Project. And then lastly, what we did come up with in Peace Catalyst is differentiate between the role of church and state, support and challenge the state. So these are 10 principles that we have wrestled with at a global level, and then specifically our organization, that can give you some real guidelines of what it means to be a true disciple, follower of Jesus as it relates to Muslims. Now, there's so much there. I just want to highlight a few things. One, I think you've picked up our radical Jesus-centeredness here, and in the Grace and Truth Project, in the Peace Catalyst version, we start. The number one thing, let's be Jesus-centered in all our interaction. As we've said more than once, Jesus is the gospel. We're not about Christianity, patriotism, or Western civilization, although we might love all of those at some level. As Paul said, I resolve to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. So we really believe that a Christ-like grace and truth orientation of Muslims is to focus on the one who is full of grace and truth. I love what E. Stanley Jones, this famous evangelist to India, says when he describes Jesus. He says this: when I go to India, I have to apologize for many things. for Western civilization, for it's only partially Christianized, for the Christian church, for it too is only partially Christianized, for myself, for I'm only a Christian in the making. But when it comes to Jesus, there are no apologies on my lips, for there are none in my heart. He is our one perfect possession. So we do everything we can not to argue Islam versus Christianity. I think you picked up that as well. And so point number one in the grace and truth approach to Jesus, to Muslims, is to be radically Jesus-centered. Now, I think it's good to step back, and I want to use this to talk about this spectrum of approaches to relating to Muslims that I think will help us. Let me just get them all out here. The far left, or on your side it would be left, yes. All roads lead to God. That's one expression. We would obviously say that's syncretistic, that's wrong, that's false, but there are many people that all roads lead to God. That's how they view it. The next one, would we share a common humanity? I like what Majid said last night. We have to recognize that, first of all, we are human beings. And I think the doctrine of being created in God's image and the sacredness of human life is so much more important in the Bible than it is for many evangelical Christians. So while this isn't the only way we relate, certainly we need to recognize these are human beings created in God's image, and we need to respond and relate to them as in that way. And frankly, common humanity, they're our neighbors. Again and again, we're talking about the great commandment, love of God and neighbors. So we share a common humanity, and that's how we can and should approach not just Muslims, but all sorts of people. Has anyone here noticed that maybe 90% of what we are saying here does not just relate to Muslims? It relates to Hindus, to the gay community, to whatever group that you wrestle with. These are things that help us love our neighbor or love the other. Be Jesus-centered. I'll come back to that, of course. Well, actually, we think this is the heart of what we're about. But I want to point out, there's some people that are committed to defending the gospel. That's called apologetics. And then lastly, those that are into polemics, which means to attack or expose error. I think the majority of people who are involved in Muslim ministry tend to go on the defending the gospel and attacking Islam. Anyone ever hear that? So that's not the good news. What's the good news? What? Who? Yeah, it's a who, not the what. It's not the doctrine of justification. It's Jesus is the good news. That needs to be the center of our approach. But I will say this, just as I said, we do share a common humanity, there is a time for apologetics. There is a time to answer real questions. For many of us, there's a time to study apologetics because it helps us understand our own faith. So many Christians, when they start talking to Muslims, they're so confused about their own faith, and it comes across that way. I was at a university presenting with Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and we had a wild and exciting time at the table when these scholars said, okay, Rick, tell us about the Trinity. And that was fun. And so at that point, I was able to explain. But I don't see attacking at all, especially polemics. I don't see it in the New Testament, in Paul's or Jesus' ministry. I see the challenge of Jesus confronting Pharisees who were, of course, angry that he was reaching out and showing inclusive love. But I don't see polemics. So I would say the three in the middle. There's a place for sharing our common humanity, a place for defending, but the heart of what we do is living, speaking, loving, following Jesus, sharing about Jesus. And here's a great quote as you think about living a Jesus-centered life. If you don't attack what they love, they will let you talk about what you love, which is Jesus. So let's not attack Islam. Let's not attack any group. Let's be Jesus-centered. Now, I'm going to have some fun on this one. I'm only going to take 3 of the 10. Be prudent in a globalized world. Anyone know who this is? Terry Jones. Now, Terry Jones said he was going to burn Qurans. As commemoration of 9/11, because we live in a globalized world. What is globalized? Local situations impact global, global impact local. Sometimes when we say globalization, it's kind of out there. But the fact is, we are interconnected, and this is a brilliant example. Here's a man that leads a church of only 50 people. Okay? He captures the attention of the whole world. David Petraeus, Secretary Robert Gates, President Obama say, don't do this. They get a hold of this crazy, angry polemicist attacking and wanting to burn the Quran. It goes around the world. It leads to riots and deaths in Afghanistan. One of the principles we believe of a grace and truth orientation is we need to be prudent. We live now in an age of interconnectedness, of globalization. So bad things ricochet around the world, ripple around the world like never before. And there's a lot of Christian leaders that have said negative, ugly things about Islam, and it's led to violence, it's led to death. We need to be prudent. Prudent talks about a little self-control. Now, I'm sure none of you have done this, but your children might have. Well, actually, some of you, you get excited on Facebook, and you put something there with a little emotion in it, and then you go, oh, why did I say that? We're quick to share things. We live in this globalized world, and especially in Christian-Muslim relations, this is problematic. Now, I want to tell you my story. I was international director of Frontiers in the year 2000. And right after 9/11, 4 months after 9/11, I was teaching at Columbia International University on church planting in the Muslim world. They asked if a journalist could come in and sit in our class and write about it. Well, he had written great things about evangelicals. So I said, sure, have him come in. So this guy comes into class, and it was so much fun. He's like opening the Bible every time because we're going through Scripture and looking at all kinds of things that the Bible teaches regarding how we share our faith and live our faith. So he was into it. The students were trying to evangelize him. So it was an interesting dynamic, to say the least. But a few months after that class, remember this is right after 9/11, this article comes out, The Stealth Crusade. Has anyone heard of Mother Jones? It's a magazine. It was famous in San Francisco area. Well, Mother Jones, in a pre-globalized world, it would have been a nice little article, small readership. But because we live in a globalized world, interconnected world, this was reprinted everywhere. I mean, it went to Iran, Malaysia, UK, Canada, Australia, many others. And then, as international director of this organization, all these groups were asking me for interviews. Washington Post, CNN, 60 Minutes, Der Spiegel, all these groups, tell us what you're doing. So here I was, leading this big mission not realizing what it means to live in this globalized world. What was bad about this article that I didn't tell you was not only, can you imagine the front page of this, there's this woman fully covered, and you can't see it there, she had a big cross, The Stealth Crusade. 3/4 of it was about Rick Love, and some of it was funny, the way I teach, etc., drinking coffee, praying, doing PowerPoint, and it was funny. But what wasn't funny is they took 2 pull quotes out of the time there, and it says, we want to wipe out Islam. We want to eliminate Islam. I said to this journalist, I said, I never said that. He says, no, but your students did. So here I am. I am the man now who wants to wipe out Islam. Going around the world. One of my friends was in Pakistan when this came out. And he said, Rick, literally, I was practicing. I do not know Rick Love. He was ready to be interrogated, and he just wanted to distance himself from me. So this was in 2002. Well, this article's gone throughout the Muslim world. So it's a little frustrating to say the least. And I remember at one point, one of my friends said, Rick, you need to have a website. I go, oh, give me a break. So egotistical. That was back when you didn't have it. And so he says to me, Rick, you have a choice. You can have a website and you can define yourself, or you'll be forever defined by Mother Jones. What would you like? So I got my website up pretty quickly and was trying to answer. Because we live in this globalized world, we need to be prudent. We need to say, how are we going to communicate? Every one of our websites, our church website, is no longer just read by Christians. And the more we engage Muslims, the more they're going to be reading. And I think we should speak, live with full integrity, singleness of devotion, be very clear. But at this point, I was this guy that wanted to wipe out Islam. So for lots of reasons, a lot of it, this particular factor that the traditional missions, I didn't think were addressing some of the issues properly. So between that and since in a call to peacemaking, I stepped down from my role, and I went on a sabbatical to Yale. And during Yale, I was supposed to have this reflective time, like you, Fred, just writing and enjoying things, as you're doing now in your studies. But what happened was they said, Rick, you know all these guys working in the Muslim world. We're having this conference, this common word. Muslims came together, 138 Muslims from around the world, every sect and denomination, said there is a common word between Christians and Muslims, and it's this: we're to love the one true God and our neighbor as ourselves. Is that a good starting point? I mean, but love of God and neighbor. So we go, oh my gosh, we need to respond. So Yale responded and said, okay, now Rick, help us organize this. So we put together this big conference, 75 high-level Muslims, 75 high-level Christian leaders coming together. And as I was organizing, I interacted with Prince Ghazi, who was the human leader of the Common Word. He was the facilitator. And so I said, dear Prince Ghazi, help me. We're going to have these special meetings, closed-door sessions, no media, and we want to invite the right people. Who should I invite? And he says, oh, yeah, invite this person, this person, this person. P.S. Are you the Rick Love of frontiers and stealth evangelism? Oh, I wanted to die. And I could have written back immediately and said, no, it wasn't stealth evangelism. It was actually stealth crusade. But I didn't think that was the approach. And actually, I did. I wrote Carl. I wrote a number of my friends and said, okay, I really do want a new identity. I need to wrestle with these issues. Let me just pause, rewind just a little. During this time, John Piper had put out a video critiquing the Common Word, and he says, but there are some Christian leaders that I respect that signed off on the Common Word, so I welcome them to respond to me. So I responded to John Piper, and it was on his website, realizing that I was no longer speaking to just Christians, but also to Muslims, the secular world. It was no longer just a little Christian conversation. So I had written this. Now, I write Prince Ghazi, dear Prince Ghazi. I was radically misquoted, Mother Jones. I did not say any of those things. And I'm sure you've been misquoted by the media. But let me say this. Ever since that time, I have been wrestling with the ethics of living out my faith in this globalized, interconnected, Googleized, or glocalized world. And so, yes, I am the man, but I am changing. And so I said something along these lines. Well, Prince Ghazi writes back and says, dear Dr. Rick, so you're not the Rick Love of frontiers. And then he did this. Laugh out loud, smiley face. He says, I've noticed your humility and blessing, the humility and blessing that you've reflected in your writing, in your response to John Piper online. it's hard for me to imagine that you really are this Rick Love who was in Mother Jones. The point is, we live in a localized world, and we need to be prudent, we need to be wise. This is only going to be more interconnected. We need to really understand how this works. So here's one good story. Anyone hear of Heart Song Church? Just as we have Terry Jones, we have My Pilgrimage and Painful Journey with a little victory there at the end. Pastor Stone was the pastor of Heart Song Church, and he put up this sign when Muslims were going to move in to his neighborhood. He decided to welcome them, to love them, and so he was interviewed on CNN. And as I said, we live in this localized world. In this interview, there were Muslims in Kashmir, northern India area, who watched and listened to this interview. During this interview, one of the Kashmiri Muslims went out, came back within an hour or so after he had done something, and they said, "What do you do?" He says, "Well, he lives in a Muslim area, and there apparently was one little church." And he says, "I just went to clean the church." And then he says, basically these Muslims said, "We are committed now. We've seen this amazing love of this Pastor Stone, and we're committed to take care of this church the rest of our lives." And one of the Muslims there said, he called Pastor Stone, finally got a hold of him and said, "Pastor, I just want to say one thing. Please tell Americans we're not terrorists." Just a beautiful example of reaching out and the positive impact we can have for the things that we do here today. I have an article you can read online, Following Jesus in a Globalized World, and a book is coming. I have a manuscript about some of the unique challenges of living prudently in this globalized world. One other point I want to give before I close. Be persistent in our call for religious freedom. I remember as a young believer, no way did I believe we should be concerned about freedom of religion. But I do believe the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is something we need to support. Article 18, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. The other day I was meeting with an imam of a big mosque in Denver, and we sat down and we were eating, and I said, "Imam," I won't give you his name, I said, "Imam, I'm here to join you in your jihad against Islamophobia." He was so excited. He says, "This is great." So he's shaking my hand. And then eventually, guess what I did? He said, basically, I was also inviting him to join me in this commitment to call the whole world to religious freedom. So I was joining him. And I remember, in fact, when Peace Catalyst International started, we flew to the East Coast to meet with different groups, and we met with the Islamic Society of North America, some of the leaders. And there, back in 2010, we said, one of the things we need to work on in terms of peace is you're going to share your faith, we're going to share our faith. How can there be freedom of religion and yet peace? And they said, "Whoa, I don't think we can start there." And I go, "Okay, but we need to get there." And just a couple of years later, there's an initiative by ISNA trying to help Muslim countries, Muslim majority countries, give more freedom of religion to Christians and other religions. And Carl and I had the joy of letting them share in the National Prayer Breakfast this last year. So I want to reiterate that I do want to join Muslims in a jihad, which is my striving against Islamophobia. And I want to challenge them, and I want to challenge all people to join together in our jihad, our striving against all forms of coercion and anything that would oppress people and keep them back from freedom of religion. Jesus does very well in a pluralistic world. We're not going to change the world and go back to the 1920s where only live in a Christian environment. There's only going to be more interconnection, more ethnic groups, more pluralism. And in this pluralistic society, we need to model love of neighbor, and that means do unto others. That means there's a call for religious freedom. We protect it for Muslims here, and we expect Muslims to protect it in their countries. So this is part of our calling in Peace Catalyst. And I'd just like to end with something Carl alluded to, and it's worth repeating. Regardless of where these Muslims are on the spectrum of Islam, on the diversity, etc., we're going to differ on terrorism, we're going to differ on the nature of Islam, but we can all agree Jesus is the one who is full of grace and truth, and we are to follow this one and model his grace and truth to Muslims today. I was putting on a Love Your Neighbor dinner with about 50 Christians at a mosque, and we had a great time breaking down barriers, building personal relationship with Muslims. And at the end, we had a Q&A time, and one Christian said to the Imam, Sheikh Mahmoud, "Tell me, what can we do to work toward peace?" And Sheikh Mahmoud says, "Read the gospel and obey it." So that's what I'm doing. That's what we're trying to do in Peace Catalyst.